Questions?
I just read through from The Fire Within by Carlos Castañeda, the chapters Assemblage Point and the position of the assemblage point. And you've been talking about the assemblage point a little bit in prior videos. In your last video, you specifically discussed how the emanations within the luminous egg, as Don Juan puts it, line up with emanations at large, is what he calls them, which are the emanations outside the egg. And that this sort of lining up is determined by the assemblage point. So my first question is about the emanations. Like, what are these is a sound an emanation or composed of emanations? I know Don Juan talks about clusters of emanations. Like a tree we see as a cluster of them. Is an emanation an energy?
Emanations are a way of thinking in the second attention. In the same way, Markov blankets and free energy is a way of thinking, also somewhat in the second attention. So a question that comes up is what? So there's I can't remember his name, a philosopher who begins it in the last century began a taxonomy of imagination. So what is imagination, first of all? What is imagination?
Imagination to me is kind of like all the stuff I see out here, but it's usually much more fluid and much less vibrant, because I can only see it kind of as like shadows or echoes. But it's like...
Can imagination be creative? I mean, create something original?
Yeah, I was thinking about this after your last video. It seems more like it's a mix-up of all of the inputs that I've had, stuff that's come before.
Can imagination,
and it can come up...
Can imagination be rational and logical?
No, it doesn't have to be rational. Often it isn't.
The question is, can it be? Do mathematicians use a mathematical imagination?
I think Ramanujan, didn't he do that? Or Ramanujan?
I'm not sure, but I'm asking you. You've done mathematical additions in your mind. That's addition, for example, or multiplication. Doesn't that require imagination?
Yeah, almost always.
So imagination can be logical and rational.
Yeah, definitely.
Imagination can be inspired or original thinking. Something original is imagined, like the double helix of Watson, in the DNA. Correct? What we're trying to do is get to a better taxonomy of imagination here, where I need you to work with me.
Yeah, well, I wouldn't call it original. So it seems more like
the Nobel Committee did, right? I mean,
well, that's the Nobel Committee.
Okay, so let's say someone comes up with, you don't think a double helix, a twisted double helix, is original?
But original meaning like other human beings have not thought of a thing.
That's what I'm talking about.
Oh, okay. Then yes,
original thinking, right? Or imagining a new symphonic movement.
Yeah. So I thought you were saying creative.
No, not in the esoteric sense. Okay, then can imagination be delusional?
Yes, definitely.
All right.
The Nasruddin story comes to mind.
And can imagination be constructive?
Yes.
So we've outlined about 4 different kinds of imagination, right? So now, what do you call the imagination that's required to grok quantum physics, or to grok saying you don't have, let's see, to grok history. What is that imagination? What shall we call that imagination?
That sounds like the oftentimes logical, rational one. And
It sounds like it, but it can't be, right? Because we can only know very little of history. But okay, all right. So now so now we have just a general overview, but I think that we're going to need right away a new understanding of imagination because the AIs are coming down on us. All right, but so let's go back now to the assemblage point and the emanations. Emanations are a way of imagining the world. And they say we're using their eyes. But by their eyes, they don't mean the like, can you see a circle right now? If I ask you to see a circle in your mind's eye?
I can see, like an invisible circle.
Okay, but you can see it in your imagination.
Basically, yeah.
All right. So that's how one might see the emanations. The same way one sees a Markov blanket or the double helix of DNA.
Same with the luminous egg?
Well, that's an interesting question. Would you say, when you look outside your window, are you imagining what you see? Of course you are. How else could it get into your brain? I mean, you think it's real. You think it's real, but there's literally an image on your retina of light bouncing off it. You can't see a tree directly. You can only see light that's bouncing off of it. And then your brain constructs the image. So you've imagined, I mean, well, I don't want to confuse folks, but on the other hand, it's just the facts. I mean, this is basically 21st century psychology, neurobiology. There's nothing esoteric about this fact. What's his name? Hoffman makes this point in a way that more people, it's accessible to more people. You're not looking directly at reality. You're looking at some icons on a screen.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Okay, so if you can imagine a tree, you can imagine luminous eggs, but it's in a different way for someone with your background, a Western logical, rational, imagination, So yeah. So the answer to your question is, what is your question again? State it again.
It was about what the emanations are and clusters of emanations, like.
They're ways of imagining. They're ways of imagining the world. Okay.
Okay.
Now the luminous eggs you can see or you cannot see depending on you. So it might be better to talk about the assemblage point.
Okay.
So we visualize a luminous egg. Let's say this was shaped like an egg, right?
Yeah.
And it's about. For a 6-foot person, it's 7 feet tall, and it spreads out to the lengths of the arms. It's a big egg, right?
Yeah.
And the way it's described, at the level of the chest, there's a disc, a cross-sectional slice.
Yes.
And this disc, the way it's visualized, goes through the depth of the egg. And on the surface of this egg, there's a point, which is the assemblage point. And let's say you started to smell smoke and see some smoke coming out of the kitchen of your apartment or house.
Okay.
Your assemblage point would move on the surface of that disc to another place. Or let's say you're listening to Bach. Your assemblage point would move slightly on the surface around the disc of that egg, around the perimeter of that disc correct?
Yeah.
Okay,
Okay.
So now, but if you listened long enough to the Bach, the assemblage point might start moving in, not just on the
Within that
surface.
dip.
Yeah, moving in towards the center of the center of the axis, right, of the egg.
Yeah.
So by moving the assemblage point, we can change our mood. See, for me, hearing that bird, that's a special bird to me. Fly over and talk moves my assemblage point inward. It was just automatic. So certain things, I mean, if you listen to enough Bach, if you meditated for a while, if you were deep in prayer or contemplation, or you were just lucky that day, your assemblage point could move into the disc. Now, what is the assemblage point? The assemblage point is that which decides which frequencies you are able to perceive in a gross way.
Mm-hmm.
So if you move your assemblage point, you're able to perceive different things in a different way. You see other bands of emanations. So you might not be able to see a luminous egg at all, unless by some happenstance you bumped your assemblage point on the surface and deeper for you. But for someone else, it might be, they might see luminous eggs all the time. Right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Or auras or energies or subtleties, subtle things, right? So the harmonics, like when you hear a guitar string, you play guitar, so I could use this metaphor. So you play, let's say you play the D string.
Mm-hmm.
The G string also vibrates because it's next to the D string.
Yeah.
Somebody else might not hear that. And there's harmonics.
Yeah, you never get a perfect.
And there's
You
harmonics.
never can get a perfect frequency.
Which is perfect, actually. That's what a music. I mean, you need. That's what adds the richness.
I mean, you can't just take a single one out. It would sound very weird.
A single frequency.
Yeah.
Yeah, of course, you need all the harmonics and the soundboard and all that, and the echoes and all the other, the natural reverb or the artificial reverb or whatever. But my point is if you're on the E string, if your assemblage point is on the E string, you're not going to hear as much, if at all, of what's on the, let's say, the D string, even though it's there. But if you move your assemblage point to the A string, which is closer to the D string, then you might be able to pick up some of the harmonics that are coming off the D string. Is that making sense?
That actually does make. Yeah,
okay, so the assemblage point is a way of describing the place at which we put our world together. And if you shift your assemblage point, like you can have a most rational. Let me give you an example of a friend of mine. He's hyper rational. He's completely, logical, hardcore, left brain, no funny business, whatever. But he goes to mass, and the incense and the smells and the Latin shifts his assemblage point so radically he becomes a different person. So they use the mass to move his assemblage point. And now he's open to different emanations.
Okay.
Is that making sense to your rational, logical Western mind?
It is making sense, but then it's overlapping with just.
Okay, so now let's get questions. Now let's get questions. See what happens.
Okay, so I have questions about moving the assemblage point.
Okay.
So you describe two different kinds of moves in the assemblage point, which Don Juan also describes. And the new seers, Don Juan, Don Gennaro, those guys, are not concerned with the shifts on the surface, like you said.
Correct. That's trivial.
Right, trivial. They're concerned with shifts inward and around within that disc toward the axis of the egg. When you can watch a person and they'll go from like one circumstance where they're jovial, enjoying life, the energy off of them is really, you want to be around it. And then 2 hours later, they've, I don't know, gone to some lecture they had to go to or whatever, and something happened or some shift occurred where now they're, like, you just don't want to be around them. They're down, they are criticizing everything, and generally have a negative energy about them. That's a lateral, that like a change in mood is a lateral shift around the surface.
Yeah.
Or it's,
you can call it that. But let me give you an example that might be better. I mean, more illustrative. None of this. It's just like a Western psychology. The difference between a mood and a feeling and an affect and a yeah, the difference between those things is very fluid, right? Depends on who you're talking to and when, and so on and so forth. I mean, words are limited again and limiting. But so let me give you another example. You're driving in your brand new, I don't know, name a sports car.
Mustang.
Yeah, okay. You just bought a Mustang. And someone, you're driving along, and someone taps the back of your bumper. That's no fun, right?
Yeah.
So you either just let it go and keep driving, or you stop your car and you get out. But let's say they hit it a little bit harder and they dent it. Okay? Now this time you have to stop the car and you have to get out. Now you're going to have to call your insurance company, and it's a real pain, right? Now let's imagine you've been rear-ended by a 3/4 ton truck and you've almost lost your life. The last one there is going to move your assemblage point. A near-death experience will move your assemblage point.
Inward.
Yes, inward, not just on the circumference, but inward. In this scheme.
Okay.
Now,
and then sometimes people. Okay, continue.
How do you differentiate near-death experiences from other commonplace experiences? How do we do that with Western psychology?
They're just
we don't.
Emotionality.
We don't.
Extremely intense.
We don't. We're retarded in our understanding of that.
It's just more intense to us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But then what happens after the near-death experience, at least in the last century, that was all considered woo-woo. Woo-woo.
Like out of body.
Can't deal with woo-woo.
Experience.
No, it's woo-woo. Can't deal with that. It scares people. Anyway, okay, so now let's go to the questions.
Okay. So the shifting in the assemblage point, Don Juan says, can happen in a ton of ways to make it go into the deeper. And he says that even things like tiredness, hallucinogens, all of the techniques of sorcery are directed toward shifting the assemblage point.
Yes, I don't like the word sorcery, and neither does he at the end. It was a great for marketing the book at the time, but it's not correct. I think that seers is a better way of framing it, or nagualismo, but that's pretty esoteric. So the path of seeing, we should say.
Okay.
I mean, and later in his later books, he talks about regretting using that word. But go ahead.
So my question is it advantageous for somebody to deliberately shift their assemblage point, because there seem to be, if you're not prepared for such a thing, it can be quite devastating.
Right. So it depends on the person. I mean, you could end up in a lunatic asylum, right? If you can't get it back. But that's unlikely unless you're already vulnerable to that kind of thing. Or you could end up, in a change in your life trajectory and changing the way you look at yourself in the world and yourself in relationship to the world. It can also be life-changing. It can also kick you into heightened awareness. It can also increase what you're able to see in this world, this marvelous, incredible, mysterious world of we can only get so far in it. Any of us. It's fascinating. There's a three-way talk between Chris Fields, Michael Levin, and Carl Friston. I'm not sure exactly which it is, but it's absolutely beautiful. You can see the new biology, psychology, and physics are kind of one thing. It's incredible because of the observer problem in physics, we realize that we can't just look at something, look at some experiment like we're not somehow or another involved in it, because we are involved in it in a very deep way. But we'll talk about that later. So keep going. Questions?
Okay.
But I highly recommend that if you can. But it's a little dense, I guess. I don't know.
So if it's not likely then that you put yourself into a lunatic asylum, Don Juan does describe how you would shift your assemblage point. And the first way he says is that you have to become aware of what you've been saying. He says specifically, realization is the technique. They say that, first of all, one must become aware that the world we perceive is the result of our assemblage points being located on a specific spot on the cocoon.
Beautiful. That's beautifully put. But let me do one aside. In more ancient settings, for example, India, there's an understanding that sometimes this development of the mystical path or whatever can lead to ego disintegration too rapidly to be comfortable for the person, and so they make provisions for that. I mean, they have a house where they take them and people take care of them or whatever. Mm-hmm. Now, if you're in the desert, you don't have to worry about any lunatic asylum. You can be as crazy as you want. Who cares, right? If there's someone with you,
right?
All right. So right. I just want to add that I didn't mean that. I didn't mean to frighten people. But for some people, their ego is too fragile to be doing this kind of stuff. They should stay away from it. Okay, but now what's the question?
So he said, first you must become aware that the world we perceive is the result of our assemblage points being located on a specific spot.
Right.
Once that's understood, the assemblage point can move almost at will as a consequence of new habits. So my question is, first of all, the become aware part. So now you've discussed this multiple times, how this is. But becoming aware is a different thing, I guess.
You learn to hear the crows singing to you, or singing to the world and you, who are the world. Or you learn to hear yourself singing as a crow. Incredible.
Okay, so that sounds like all of the practice of work that you've been talking about.
Yeah,
These
this
types of things.
This is part of this is just another way of describing the same thing. Mm-hmm. And it's a useful one for the West.
And then when he says can move almost at will as a consequence of new habits, is this like disrupting routine?
But then you got to kick it out of that habit too, eventually. But yeah, you could get it. You could get it from meditation practice. You could get it from in martial arts. I mean, usually you're not focused on your hara. You're not thinking. You're not feeling behind. So a good one would be how aware of you are the space behind you?
Uh, Sometimes I
Yeah,
think of that,
if there's
but
some
not.
day, if you're walking down the street in New York or something like that, yeah, you're kind of aware of it. But in general, you can
Yeah.
create that space around you to be aware of the whole thing. And martial artists do this to great effect and benefit. So that's one thing you can do. But another one I think that's really, really nice, an example, is that gravity is an extraordinary thing. We really don't know what it is except the curvature of space-time. But for an individual man or woman walking around this earth, you can envision, using your imagination, these pylons going down from your feet into the ground, going down about 3 feet into the ground. Now, when you walk like that, you're very stable. So that's a habit of visualizing those pylons, and you'll become more stable. So if you're doing martial arts and you get yourself into your, what is it, the opening stance or the warrior stance or whatever it might be called, and you've got these pylons going into the ground, although you're just as light and you're just as fast and you're just much more stable on the ground. And so the mind is capable of doing many, many things like this, but we live in this puny little version of the mind where we don't use our capacities to do these things. And I don't want to use the word imagination because the word imagination is too weak. It's weak sauce. So it's something else. Okay, thoughts, questions?
Okay, that's actually interesting to me. So as you're walking around, if you thought of having pylons coming out of your legs into the ground, so
Extensions of the
how do
bones.
you know?
Yeah.
Yeah, uh, you're saying over time or with that framing, that visualization, you would actually be more because how is that different from just, oh, I think I'm being more stable? Sometimes I'll imagine things and I'll be like,
It is
I'll think I'm
different.
more
This is where you have to
stable.
do it to know, but it is different.
It is different.
Yeah, it's different. It's not the same as being on the surface of the earth. Or when you look at a tree, I mean, this is I don't know, it's a free association. But when you look at a tree, you can either visualize a tree with roots or without roots. I mean, roots going deep into the ground, and you see a different tree depending on what your habit is.
Okay, two questions. Or one comment is that seems, or yeah, that is pretty foreign to the Western mind. That seems like something you do as a kid up until about 7, 8, 9, and then you stop doing.
See, that's too bad. But what's foreign? What part of it's foreign?
Oh, just because of that, people stop doing. None of my friends or people I talk to walk around imagining, oh, the root system of the tree looks like this, and I don't want to use imagination like you said, or walk around being like, oh, there's pylons coming out of my feet, and I'm taking that idea seriously, or things like that.
Your martial
And
artist
so,
friends do. The ones that are well trained. They just don't talk about it because it's not okay to talk about, except among each other, right?
right.
It's like we can't talk about a third eye here in the West because that's cuckoo. But in other cultures, they talk about that. Or we can talk about a sixth sense, right? But we can't talk about other things. So the culture and its assemblage point determines what's permissible to see or think or visualize or interact with and determines your world, right?
Yeah.
But as Wittgenstein said, the world is the facts, and the facts are much more enormous than that. And then we have language itself. I was struggling because I referred to God as Him, and then I corrected myself and said her, but then that's not right either. And then what is my option? It.
I don't like that.
Right. So none of them work. Right. So here we are. We're trapped by our language, by our culture, by our assemblage point, the location of our assemblage point.
I see. Okay, that's been helpful. Okay, I think that's all I wanted to ask about for the assemblage point. I have questions about stalking.
Okay, good. Stalking is very important.
You want to hit the bell to separate
Oh,
things
yeah.
out?
Thank you.
Okay, so stalking comes from, or is spoken about more in Don Juan's The Eagle's Nest, where Carlos is being
The eagle's
taught
nest?
by the eagle's gift. Sorry.
Yeah.
The eagle's gift from the chapter Florinda.
Let's explain to folks that eagle in the Toltec, especially in the old seers, eagle was a way of describing the Nagual, which is another word for God, which is another word for the source of all there is, or another synonym for the Tao, or for, these are just words describing that which cannot be described.
Right. The emanations we spoke of are referred to as the eagle's emanations.
Right. The emanations of the Nagual, or God, or Allah, or, again, words are limited and limiting. The emanations of the real, we could call it the real with a capital R.
Yeah. So Carlos is dropped off by Don Juan with this woman, Florinda. And Florinda is supposed to teach him the art of stalking. And stalking is an art like dreaming, which is kind of like lucid dreaming that we talked about, that warriors partake in.
No, it's more than lucid dreaming, but okay, keep going.
Right. Well, yeah, just as a... Okay. So, she takes him through seven principles.
Are you dreaming right now?
I'm trying to.
Okay.
My dreams are more... Yeah. So, she teaches him the 7 principles of stalking.
Oh, boy.
The 3 principles of the rules for stalkers, and the result of applying the principles. And so I wanted to ask about each of them, because the way Florinda explains how she learned is that she started off applying the principles to very, very small things in her life, and then building up to the big decisions, the big actions that one has to go through.
Let's see what happens.
Right.
So this is a sophisticated, educated, socially elevated woman in Mexico City, right? Florinda.
Yeah.
All right, go ahead. Probably one of the students of Julian.
Yes.
The Nagual, Julian.
So Florinda says...
This is not Florinda Dao, by the way. This is not one of Carlos's acolytes or whatever she was. This is not an American. This is an older woman in Mexico City. Okay, because it can be confusing to people.
Right. Florinda says that Julian, in her first year working with stalking, made her apply the principles of stalking to things she did daily. Small things at first, leading up to the major issues of her life.
Great. Give an example.
So, she doesn't actually give an example of the small things that she applied it to.
Well, then let me give an example. Let's say you make a cup of tea in the morning. You do it perfectly. You do it the way a warrior does. You do it consciously. You do it deliberately. There's no sloppiness. You're there present with the boiling water and the tea and the cup. And so you're there fully present. You stalk it. Or let's say you're washing the dishes. You wash the dishes fully conscious, fully aware, carefully, consciously, deliberately. And you turn that into a meditation or to a spiritual practice. That would be stalking, making tea, or stalking, washing the dishes. All right? I just throw in that example so people have an idea.
Yeah, that's good as a base to go off. So that, what you just said, would touch on a few of the aspects of the principles. But I wanted to go through the principles, and we could apply it to the tea example, because some of them were a little more confusing to me how it applies. So the first principle, Florinda says, the first principle of the art of stalking is that warriors choose their battleground, she said.
Mm-hmm.
A warrior never goes into battle without knowing what the surroundings are.
Unless he's ambushed. Yeah. Unless she's ambushed. But yeah, as a general rule. Okay, good.
So I'm making my tea. I choose the battleground. Don't go into the battle without knowing what the surroundings are. Apply that to small things in life.
Instead of making tea, I should have said putting gas in your car.
Okay, sure.
In a bad part of town. Or a good part of town. Yeah. All right? So when you put gas in your car, you're completely conscious of what you're doing. You're completely there with the gas pump, the hose, and the nozzle. You open the gas cap and you insert it consciously. Meanwhile, you're aware of what's around you 360, and you're planted into the ground, with those pylons, for example. All right, and you're aware of all that. You're just completely aware of your surroundings and what you're doing. You're stalking that putting gas in your car as a simplified version of what for preparation for what comes next.
Okay.
All right.
Yeah.
So there's some parts of New York, I presume, that putting gas in your car is something you better be pretty alert.
There are many, yeah. in New York, around where I'm at, there are parts where I want to be very alert.
Okay, good.
And I definitely, choose where to go.
So making tea or putting gas in your car, one of those. Okay, good.
Sure. The second principle, to discard everything that is unnecessary, is the second principle of the art of stalking.
Yes. This is a warrior's way anyway, or a Taoist way, or a Buddhist way, or Jesus's way. Yeah, you don't encumber yourself with unnecessary stuff hanging on to you. Or the Sufi way. Every tradition of warriorship includes stripping yourself of all the unnecessary accoutrements of your ego.
That makes sense. The third principle. Don't complicate things. Aim at being simple. Apply all the concentration you have to decide whether or not to enter into battle, for any battle is a battle for one's life. This is the third principle of the art of stalking. A warrior must be willing and ready to make his last stand here and now, but not in a helter-skelter way.
Okay, so this would be called ruthlessness when you go into battle. Ruthlessness. So let's say you're going to ask for a raise. You prepare.
Okay.
You're ready, and whatever you're going to do, you do it ruthlessly. You do it with absolute 100% confidence, or you don't do it at all. Or if you're in martial arts and you're going in you're going to attack, you don't do it like, oh, maybe I shouldn't have attacked. Maybe I should, it's 50-50 here. Maybe, 60-40, I should go in and do this move or that move. No, you don't fight like that. You go 100%. You're completely, if you're going to throw a punch, throw a punch. You don't watch Mike Tyson throw a punch. It's not ambivalent. It's not half-hearted. It's it's ruthless. It's with all you've got. It's what did she say? Read it again.
Apply all the concentration you have to decide whether or not to enter into battle. For any battle is a battle for one's life.
Right. Yeah, so you decide whether you're going to throw a punch or, and do it. But don't dilly-dally around. Don't half-ass it.
And then that last part also, but not in a helter-skelter way.
Yeah. Okay.
The fourth principle. So Don Juan, or Carlos, because I guess he's in heightened awareness, he's learning this stuff, he gets a little sick. or something. So he stretches out a bit on the couch, and he
Ay,
took some.
Carlitos. Carlitos,
He takes
Carlitos.
some. He's taking deep breaths to relax his midsection. So then
She's
Florinda
probably
says,
scared him half to death. This woman. She's a powerful woman, right? And so she's probably scared him. And
well,
so
yeah,
if you're afraid, you're also your assemblage point has been moved.
yeah, you can feel that.
Okay. Next.
Yeah. So she says, good. I see that you're applying the fourth principle of the art of stalking. Relax, abandon yourself, fear nothing.
There you go.
Only then, yeah. Only then will the powers that guide us open the road and aid us. Only then. So this is just...
Go with your whole heart or don't go at all. And have God at your back, or have the Nagual supporting you, or have the will of God on your side. I don't know, that may be premature. I don't know what this woman is going to say next, so keep going, I guess. But you're leaving out the story, right? And the story is really the whole meat of it, right?
How she got taken out of her very self-important life and turned into a stalker or a warrior.
She was a princess and she needed to be converted to a warrior princess because that was in her nature. But to do that, she had to overcome, her husband had to be overcome, right? Her self-importance and entitlement as an upper-class Mexican woman had to be overcome. And the story is about how an hechicera, a little Indian healer or witch, a curandera, hechicera, somewhere in that spectrum, did all of this to her ruthlessly, perfectly, with the help of a Nagual also, right? So the story, but by the way, the story is on YouTube, and it's there for you to listen to. It's an interesting story, and it's a teaching tale. All right, so keep going.
So Carlos's mind is all over the place. So he.
They're in a living room in Mexico City.
Yeah.
And the guy still can't control himself.
So he walks around the room a little bit, and she says, "You've correctly applied the fifth principle of the art of stalking. Don't let yourself wander away." What is the fifth principle, I asked. When faced with odds that cannot be dealt with, warriors retreat for a moment. They let their minds meander. They occupy their time with something else. Anything would do. This one confused me a little bit.
Now you're open. Okay, so you don't know what to do. You're totally at a loss. Where you don't do something just because you feel like it needs to be done, unless it doesn't need to be done right then and there. What you do is you open your awareness to impulses from the outside. And this is where having God at your back, or the wind at your back, or the Nagual supporting you, or so impulses arise, but you have to give them a chance. When you're new, right? You have to, and then you get used to relying on this, and then you can just, so you step back into awareness, and something comes. So by wandering around, he's giving himself a little time for more subtle impulses. The best is to stop thinking. If you can just stop thinking, then all kinds of magic is possible. It can shift you into another awareness.
How do you know you're following impulses as opposed to being random? So like the other day I went for a walk, and I just I was walking, deciding like which way to go, right, left, straight, whatever. And at each corner, I kind of stopped. There's a lot of, I'm in New York, so it's a lot of four ways, right? Uh, and I guess I, quote, followed impulses, end quote. And it led me right to a little church that's somewhat nearby me. And there were a bunch of birds outside of all varieties chirping. You don't get to see that very often. Usually you just see pigeons. And it was a beautiful setup scenario. And I guess I felt close to God there. So it felt like I was led there. But how do I know that I'm not just, I stop, I meander, do the walk around thing,
That
and
who's
then I'm open
not?
to
That who's not? Or what's not? See, you're still living in separation, and you still think that the world is not you. You don't understand yet that you create the world with your assemblage points that determine what emanations you're able to see. But there could be a whole other set of emanations, and there are, that you're not even aware of until your assemblage point moves. And some of these, by the way, emanations we're born with, they're fixed, they're determined by God, right? We see, we hear of certain frequencies, we see certain frequencies, we're sensitive to certain temperatures, and others will just burn us to a crisp. So those are kind of fixed by the eagle, by God, by Nagwa, whatever. I don't like that eagle thing. That really rubs me the wrong way. But you could see back in ancient history why they might, or I don't know. Anyway, so yeah, you don't know. And the other thing is you. What's the you that you're talking about? The tiny little sliver of reality that you're calling reality? The world is much more mysterious than you can imagine. And marvelous too. So good. Just keep going. Number 6?
Number 6.
Whatever, so I don't know what these things are. I don't know how they're coming up, or anything like that. But it all goes into one thing anyway, so let's keep going, right?
Yeah, there's a lot of overlap.
And also,
like
she's idiosyncratic. Remember, this is an old lady in Mexico City, so she may have a different scheme altogether than Nagual in northern Mexico, Don Juan, or even central Mexico, Oaxaca, Don Gennaro. And then Julian's Nagual, Elias, completely different man.
Right.
Yeah, so we're looking at 3 or 4 generations. It's fantastic. Okay, keep going.
Her 6th principle. Warriors compress time. Even an instant counts. In a battle for your life, a second is an eternity that may decide the outcome. Warriors aim at succeeding, therefore they compress time. Warriors don't waste an instant.
No, you don't waste an instant.
Yeah, so...
If you're bored, you study boredom. If you're dysphoric, you feel dysphoria. You study dysphoria. If your mind is scattered, you watch scattered mind. And then when things are more optimal, you use that, right? But so the training of a warrior, I mean, this sounds like the training of a great athlete or a boxer or a martial artist or an Olympic level athlete. It's kind of all the same thing.
Yeah, I've noticed that more recently. When I was reading the flower ornament scripture, I was like, I have a friend who's an Olympian, and it sounded a lot like him. I mean, his dedication to his sport is...
Yeah, excellence is not a bad word, although these days in America, sometimes it feels like it might be. Excellence is not a bad word. All right, keep going.
Okay, so the last principle. In Florinda's story, the hechicera woman that you spoke about, who brought her into this lifestyle from being a princess who was very self-important, turning her into a warrior. was actually at the front of
Well,
Don
society thought
Julian's.
she was important too. She was very beautiful, and she was born into a
Right,
rich
right.
family. So society treated her this way, and they molded her, right? So herself, who knows what herself was? She didn't know. But what she'd been told by those around her was that she was very special because she was beautiful and rich, and she needed, and she desperately needed to be freed from her situation, which is that of an oppressed woman who was defined by the people around her, including her husband. So keep going, though. Principle 7.
So the Hechicera woman who took her out of all of that and brought her through the path that she went on to become a warrior was actually operating under the direction of Nagual, we think, Julian.
Yeah, he's probably training her.
Who only came into her story as like the leader of this whole operation much later on.
Right.
And so she says, he showed her that a stalker never pushes himself to the front. Her benefactor, Julian, was the chief, and yet, looking at him, no one would have ever believed it. He always had one of his female warriors as a front, while he freely mingled with patients, pretending to be one of them, or he posed as an old fool who was constantly sweeping dry leaves with a broom.
Completely reminiscent of the Sufi organization. I mean, it's not an organization. The organic setup that they use with masters and masters, teachers, students, beginners, higher level folks, right? So we see exactly that. I think you also see the same thing maybe in Christian structures, but those are more ossified. So yeah, it was a teaching setup.
Okay.
She says the Nagual didn't waste anything. He didn't waste the opportunity for his student, the Hechicera. He didn't waste an opportunity for Florinda, the rich bitch, and he didn't waste the opportunity of the circumstance. So he used it all, right? I was reading earlier in the Tao Te Ching about the fullness. Everything's full. People don't realize it. It's always full. And there's no need to those who preserve the way do not want fullness. Just because of not wanting fullness, it is possible to use the full and not make anew. They don't have to create situations. Situations are created for them. And that's true for all of us, if only we could see it. All things are teaching at all times. Everything's coming to our aid. The universe is literally trying to bring you home. Literally. It just wants nothing more for you than you to come home. It's incredible. It's just unbelievable. That's what life is finding our way home. Okay, sir? Question?
Yeah. I have a question about the Bodhisattva vow, based on what you just said.
Okay.
So when I'm reading the flower... Say it?
I just said Bodhisattva vow. I like the way it sounds, Bodhisattva vow. Bodhisattva vow. Okay, go ahead.
I always think of that Bodhisattva song. When I'm reading the flower ornament scripture, the Bodhisattva vow is incorporated in a lot of what I'm reading. And so it's, as the Buddhas or the enlightening beings are going through these mantras or these sayings, whatever they're expounding, they say that they wish for the enlightenment of all sentient beings, or they hope that all sentient beings hear the teaching of the Buddhas, or they...
So let me just comment just a little bit on that fact. Okay, first of all, it's 2nd century, five centuries before the Tibetans are going to get going, right? So this is it's inherent in the root of Buddhism. And the thing I'd like to comment on as a ex-psychiatrist is it's like such a safety net. It's brilliant because it creates a safety where you could get lost, where you could lose it altogether, but they've got it worked out. You see, I don't know how to articulate it better than that. But by putting altruism at the root of the endeavor and doing this not for your own self or for your own ego, not for your own enlightenment, but for the enlightenment of all sentient beings, you somehow also create this structure of love, which is safety, and safety, which is love, and it just works out gorgeously. You don't have any of these existential crises and crazy stuff like that you get in methods that don't include that foundation. I'm not saying it's the only tradition that has it. What I'm saying is it's there for a reason. All right, now ask your question. Sorry.
My question is about the Bodhisattva vow, the enlightenment of all sentient beings, and about the trajectory that I've heard from Idris Shah in his books and that you've said. So I guess this is a bit of a synthesis question. You say that the world or truth is conspiring to bring you home.
No, the universe is conspiring to bring you home.
The universe is conspiring to bring you home. And that there's a conscious evolution of the planet. It seems like even the animals are growing. Human beings seem to be more conscious these days. My question is what's
the purpose of this planet? I mean, it's so obvious. You know how many planets there are in this universe? Trillions upon trillions of stars and solar systems and planets all over the place. But there's consciousness on one. I mean, what? You need a boot to kick you in the head and say, hey, the purpose of this planet, the purpose of us, the purpose of all of this is the evolution of our consciousness. To where we can see the obvious finally, we can see what's what. I mean, what else could it be? Why would there be? I mean, I heard Elon talking about the Fermi problem. Why aren't there any aliens? Why aren't there any alien civilizations? Why is there no consciousness anywhere else in the universe? Well, there's a reason why. We're it. And we may make the whole universe conscious and then we just dissolve into love. I don't know. But I'm just talking about the planet. Obviously, this planet is designed for consciousness. Do you have any other candidates for why it's here?
No.
Okay, so I think we just need to face the facts, right? Just face the facts, obviously. We've got more consciousness than the rest of the universe combined. And it's a big universe. Excuse me.
Okay.
All right, let's get to your question. Let's get to your question.
No, I think I'm bumping up against an unknowable question. But okay. Yeah.
What's the question?
Like why it's taking so long.
So long? What's taking so long?
Like you live for so this is an assumption.
No, wait a minute. Let me warn you and everyone else that's listening. Never mistake the unknown for the unknowable. You cannot, don't ever do that. Just because something's unknown does not mean it's unknowable. There are things that are unknowable, true. But that boundary between the unknown and the unknowable is one that we must constantly be vigilant about. Because to mistake the unknown for the unknowable, that would be the end of science, the end of art, the end of all of this. Man can't live that way. We're always pushing the boundary of the unknown. That's our role.
So you said that you can't know when you're going to die. Like so you don't get to.
Okay.
You don't get
First
to know.
of all, I've also said that you're not going to die. Correct?
Correct.
Now, which of those do you think is more accurate? They're both accurate. They're just at different levels. One is the truth, and the other one is Maya, or this bodily existence.
Yeah.
Do you see?
Yeah.
Death and birth are both things that are invented by the monkey brain. Well, because it's in a monkey body, right? And that is gonna decompose. But that's not what we are. We're not monkeys. We're not hairless monkeys with big brains and keyboards. We're much more than that.
For purposes of not conflating unknown and unknowable.
Okay.
You're saying time of death is an unknowable or unknown?
Death is an illusion. First of all, death is an illusion. There's the dissolving of the body, and it's returned to the dirt where it came from the earth. That's just the coming, growing, and decomposition of a physical thing in common parts.
Agreed.
So there's no death there.
Yeah.
It's the death of an illusion, maybe the death of the death of a mirage. Just like when you wake up from a dream, and the dream's over, but that's not death. Okay, so now what's the question?
What's unknowable? What's unknowable?
Oh, that's a huge question. It's too broad. I mean, I could answer. I could be smart. I could say everything that's knowable but not known is the unknown, and everything other than that is the unknowable. I could say that, but that's not going to help us.
Okay.
God, in the ultimate analysis, God is not knowable in his attributes or his. See, just talking about it messes it up. Because it's not a he or a she. It's not an it. It's not a thing. It's before being and non-being. It's beyond all of that. It's beyond conceiving of. It's beyond imagining. I don't know if that helps or not, but the question strikes me as poorly formed, counselor. Do you see what I'm saying? Yeah, reformulate the question.
Yeah.
You want to reformulate it? Because even the question, what's unknowable, you put a what in there as if it's a what. It's beyond what or not what.
So
the whole thing will fit in the palm of your hand. The whole universe right there. The whole idea of scale is a human invention. So when you could
invention or is it?
Go ahead.
Okay. It seems like that it's not an invention. It's the way that our emanations are set up with the assemblage point. It's our perception.
That's an invention. That's the human invention. All right. That's the human invention. That's the frogs don't have the same one. They only see things that are moving. I don't know if that's entirely true, but basically they see things that are moving.
Yeah, if I had to close my eyes and Okay.
All right, sir?
Yeah, one last question that's different.
Okay, good. Question.
So we spoke last time about purifying practice, and I just had a quick follow-up about mala beads.
We just call them malas.
It's just mala. Okay, so about mala. Using the mala, wearing them, and then doing practices with mantra. Could you give examples of that?
What kind of mantra do you want?
Well,
energizing, non-energizing. Yeah,
I
today's
asked about this, and you said
yeah. That's probably best for another time. I'm kind of I've reached the what I can do today. We should do
okay.
that some other time when I can do it better.
Yeah, I'll remember.
Okay, good.
Sure.
All right, anything else, sir?
Not for now, no.
Open your mind. Keep your mind open.